Part 2, A Plant with a Past, The Long History of Cannabis. Part 2, A Plant with a Past, The Long History of Cannabis. You're listening to World Reading Club, presented by Hakeem Alibokas Alexander, on Spreaker, social podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with UniquilibriuM. Hello, Cicely Marie Guth. This edition's reading focus comes to us from the Mayo Clinic. Medical marijuana, the science and the benefits. Hello, Mojo. Relieving pain, easing anxiety, improving sleep, plus the many uses of CBD. This is part 2 that I have to continue of chapter 1. This is page 15, A Plant with a Past. Marijuana versus cannabis. What's in a name? Some people call it marijuana, while others call it cannabis. What's the difference? Cannabis refers to the scientific genus of the plant and is derived from the ancient word for it in Greek, cannabis. Just for reference, it's spelled with a K. K-A-N-N-A-B-I-S. K-A-N-N-A-B-I-S. Oh. I'm going to just put in a title here, just so we see this is the, people might want to see the Mayo Clinic designation. Some of those things matter to folks. All right. The word marijuana originated with Spanish speakers in Mexico. To some, the important distinction is that cannabis refers to a number of different species or strains, including those that do not affect a person's mental state. Marijuana, on the other hand, is often associated with those strains and parts of the plant that are psychoactive. That means they produce a high. Hello, Brian Hurlbert. To many, though, the word marijuana carries other baggage, including racist connotations because of its history in the United States. The word was adopted in the 1930s and has been attributed to efforts to exploit anti-Mexican prejudice by associating cannabis with immigrants. Because of this, many have called for the word to be dropped from use today. In Washington state, lawmakers in 2022 banned the word marijuana from all state statutes based on the argument that it was racist. A 2022 update to the Associated Press style book, which helps shape the language used by news organizations, pointed out, cannabis is the usual term outside North America. Some prefer cannabis because of arguments the term marijuana has anti-Mexican roots. However, the book ruled that the terms were interchangeable and either could be used. Internet search trends on Google show how the name has slowly been shifting from marijuana to cannabis. Over the last 15 years, the share of people searching for the term cannabis has been growing as the number of people searching for the word marijuana has been shrinking. Marijuana remained slightly more common as a search term in 2022, but the lines have been converging. Hello, TaylorMade. And there's a little a graph here showing the Google search trends for the terms marijuana and cannabis in green and marijuana in red. From January 1st, 2004, cannabis was really low and it started to climb higher all the way to November 1st, 2016, whereas it shows in this graph that the term marijuana was a little bit higher and then is approaching now closer to where cannabis is. There's a little sidebar up here. It says the word marijuana carries baggage, including racist connotations because of its history in the United States. Hello, Noble Ron, and welcome back, Terryson Gawa. Continuing, the Mayo Clinic is part 2. Added, whoa, hey, what's this? Oh, that was a little sidebar. So this is continuing from part 1, left off saying that in the mid-1930s, a church group made a small film called Tell Your Children, with a sensational plot showing cannabis leading to mania, suicide, and attempted manslaughter and rape. An exploitative film distributor obtained the movie and changed the title to Reefer Madness. Added to the film were some even more outrageous scenes, after which it was launched in movie houses around the country, going on a run that stretched for years. After falling into obscurity, the film was revived in the 1970s by activists seeking to legalize cannabis. In popular culture today, it has attracted a cult following among those who find it hilarious, in spite of its original sinister mission of misinformation. I myself find it hilarious because there's some like Jekyll and Hyde characters in the film, from what I remember of Reefer Madness. It is insanely hilarious. It is really, really stupid. So yeah, I can see the appeal of how a lot of people have taken to it as a cult classic these days. At about the same time that Reefer Madness was making its first run in movie theaters around the country, Congress passed the Marijuana Tax Act, supported by those who had campaigned against the evil weed. The act was an important step because it not only prohibited non-medical use of cannabis, but also saddled doctors with hefty fees and regulations if they prescribed it. The American Medical Association tried unsuccessfully to stop the act. 1970s. Significantly, cannabis was removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia in 1942 after being there for 9 decades. 9 decades. Do you know how many years 9 decades is, people? Because 1 decade is 10 years. So 9 is 90 years. Just so you know. If you didn't. If you don't know, now you know, smoker. Um, continuing. After being there for 9 decades, it had fallen or been pushed from the ranks of legitimate medicine. Over the coming decades, the criminal penalties would be ratcheted up repeatedly, and research into its medicinal potential would be cut off. In the 1950s, passage of the Boggs Act and the Narcotic Control Act resulted in stiff minimum prison sentences of 2 to 10 years for cannabis possession. President Richard Nixon's administration pushed even harder against cannabis. In 1970, cannabis was listed as a Schedule I drug in the Controlled Substances Act, putting it in the same category as heroin and LSD. That not only increased the criminal penalties for using it, but also had important implications for its medical use. Doctors were barred from prescribing any Schedule I drugs to their patients. Further, that created regulatory roadblock to basic research on cannabis that to this day has limited understanding of its effects, both beneficial and harmful. Hello, John Bush and Karaoke Volks. A senior member of the Nixon administration later was quoted acknowledging that the anti-drug movement of the late 1960s and early 70s was largely aimed at disrupting both the hippie movement and the Black community. The offensive against cannabis was fully underway. The offensive against cannabis was fully underway. Over coming decades, successful presidential administrations from both dominant political parties would continue to target cannabis. All right, I'm going to there's a sidebar here once again in another green box on page 16, and it says cannabis cousins approved. While medical cannabis remains illegal under federal law, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, has approved 4 medications related to the plant. These medications fall into a different legal and regulatory category than medical cannabis, having undergone the approval process required by the FDA. Healthcare providers are permitted to prescribe these to patients as they would any other therapy, and the medications are delivered through a regular pharmacy. However, their approved uses are more limited than those listed in most state laws for medical cannabis. In 2018, the FDA approved the first medication derived from cannabis, Epidiolex, approved for treating some rare forms of epilepsy in patients 2 years of age and older, is derived from one of the non-psychoactive substances in cannabis, cannabidiol, CBD. Prior to that, the FDA approved 3 medications that use manufactured versions of another of the potent chemical compounds found in cannabis, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. Dronabinol, Marinol, made from synthetic THC, was approved in 1985 to treat nausea caused by chemotherapy, and it was subsequently approved to treat weight loss related to acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS. Since then, the FDA has approved 2 other medications containing synthetic THC. The agency approved Nabilone, Sesamet, in 2006 to treat nausea from chemotherapy, and another dronabinol product, Syndros, in 2016 to treat the same condition as well as anorexia from AIDS. I didn't know this about dronabinol. I've known it as Marinol. I didn't know it was that early that it was approved in 1985. Wow, that goes way back. Hello, Frank. Welcome, Frankie J. Matthews, Elizabeth McClung, and Sharente Carr. Hello, hello. Curdy J. Welcome. All right, let's continue here. California votes on cannabis. This is page 17, a plant with a past. A turning point for the medical use of cannabis came in 1996, when a voter initiative called the Compassionate Use Act was approved by 55% of California voters. More than 5.3 million people supported the act. It exempted individuals from criminal prosecution for using cannabis when recommended by a doctor, who in turn also would be legally shielded. After court cases and subsequent legislation clarified the law, the California Medical Association told its members the law had broad application, allowing cannabis use for cancer, anorexia, AIDS, chronic pain, spasms, glaucoma, arthritis, and migraines. In addition, it could be used for any other illnesses for which marijuana provides relief. And that's in quotations. For any other illnesses for which marijuana provides relief. I'm actually very familiar with this because I lived in California since 2002. And as soon as I got there, I had realized how broadly used and allowed it was. Hello, John Bush. Welcome back. And Annalicia Hardman? Or is it Hardman? Hardman? All right, continuing. The division over cannabis use between states and the federal government continued, however. In 2005, the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution allowed the federal government to prohibit the medicinal and recreational use of cannabis. Justice John Paul Stevens's opinion in the case was taken by some to be a suggestion that the executive branch might reclassify cannabis for medical use. That still has not been done. In 2014, however, Congress approved the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which prohibited the U.S. Justice Department from interfering with state laws passed for medical cannabis. I did not know that, and that was 2014. The Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment prohibited the U.S. Justice. Maybe I don't know about it because it doesn't seem to be in practice. It's possible. But there's a lot of stuff I don't know. And I haven't really done a lot of marijuana research for many years because I lived in China where it was highly illegal. Continuing, Growing and industry. Despite the federal government's classification of medical cannabis as having no accepted medical use, the medical cannabis industry has been growing rapidly. Today, medical cannabis is big business. One estimate valued the global industry at $11 billion in 2021, with astronomical growth rates forecast at 21% annually for the remainder of the decade. By late 2022, some 37 states and the District of Columbia had allowed medical use of cannabis. 21 of those states and the district also allowed recreational use by adults. Some other states either allow low potency cannabis or are considering medical use. I find that interesting that the District of Columbia, that's DC, allows the use of medical cannabis. I mean, that's where the White House is. 37 states. Yet still, it's federally illegal where the federal branches of our government are. I don't know. See, cannabis confusion. All right, continuing. Cannabis, once considered the domain of the weird or even the dangerous, has largely been normalized. A 2022 Harris poll found that 78% of Americans support legalization of cannabis at the national level, and an even greater number support allowing further research on its effects. The survey also found that more than half of Americans had at least tried cannabis. Because of continued federal opposition, however, cannabis cannot be prescribed by doctors. Instead, based on the specifics of the law in the state in which they practice, doctors can recommend that their patients be placed in a registry or be given a card that allows them to purchase cannabis to treat one of the conditions approved for cannabis. Those approved conditions also vary by state. And then it re-emphasizes here in a nice little box that says a 2022 Harris poll found that 78% of Americans support legalization of cannabis at the national level, and an even greater number support allowing further research on its effects. Welcome, Kingshid Talk? Kingshid? Kingshid? How do you pronounce that? Kingshid? All right. Let's see. Continuing. I think we're almost done with chapter 1. Yep. There's one more page. Then I'll take a break and come back with chapter 2. After I found out that on Spreaker, I gotta fix some stuff. So I'm looking here at a graph. It's a map of the United States, and it shows medical cannabis and CBD programs. So we have a blue is medical, red is CBD, green is both, and there's a gray that's neither. And it looks like only one state doesn't have either. Is that Idaho? Let me find yep. I know my states by shape. That's Idaho. It's neither. So states plus the District of Columbia and territories with approved medical cannabis or CBD programs. So I could go through I'm going to go through this list. Okay. Alabama, medical. And so now we're looking at medical and CBD or both. Okay. So Alabama, medical. Alaska, both. Arizona, both. Arkansas, medical. California, both. Colorado, both. Connecticut, both. All states with C have both. I don't know. Delaware, medical. Florida, medical. Georgia, CBD. Hawaii, medical. Idaho, neither. It's the only state with neither, it looks like. Yeah, because I'm looking at the map and that's the only one in gray. Listen for your state, folks. Is your state have medical, CBD, both, or neither? Hello, Brian Coletto. Continuing from Idaho. Idaho, neither. Illinois, both. Indiana, CBD. Iowa, CBD. Kansas, CBD. Kentucky, CBD. Louisiana, medical. Maine, both. So now I'm reading a list of the states plus the District of Columbia and territories with approved medical cannabis or CBD programs. Continuing. Maryland, both. Massachusetts, both. Michigan, both. Minnesota, medical. Mississippi, medical. Missouri, both. Montana, both. Nebraska, CBD. Nevada, both. New Hampshire, medical. New Jersey, both. New Mexico, both. New York, both. North Carolina, CBD. North Dakota, medical. Ohio, medical. Oklahoma, medical. Oregon, both. Pennsylvania, medical. Rhode Island, both. South Carolina, CBD. South Dakota, medical. Tennessee, CBD. Texas, medical. Utah, medical. Vermont, both. Virginia, that's where I am, both. Washington, both. West Virginia, medical. Wisconsin, CBD. Wyoming, CBD. District of Columbia, both. Puerto Rico, both. U.S. Virgin Islands, both. Guam, I love Guam, both. Northern Mariana Islands, both. And American Samoa, neither. Wait a minute, I don't see American Samoa on this map. There is no American Samoa here. Well, okay. Because they have, Alaska pulled off to the side there and Hawaii Islands I can see. But there's no American Samoa, there's no Puerto Rico. Well, that's why they have them as a separate little list at the bottom. Okay. Welcome. Who's in the room just came in here new? See Michael J, Mojo, Brian Coletto, King Should Talk, Taylor Made, Elizabeth McClung, Curtis James, John Bush, Annalisa Hardiman, Terry Sandawo, Frankie J. Matthews, Sharente Carr, Brian Herbert, Karaoke Vox, Noble Ron, Wandering Fool. I'm continuing with the last page here of chapter 1. I'll take a quick break to go check in and make sure that people aren't turning into zombies in the bar, and I'm going to continue with chapter 2. One report found conclusive or substantial evidence that cannabis did help certain conditions, including chronic pain, nausea caused by chemotherapy, and multiple sclerosis spasticity. Here's the final section. Much medical cannabis information isn't based on sound science. The research, though, has not caught up with the wide availability and broad public acceptance of cannabis. Several years ago, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine set out to evaluate and summarize everything that could be learned from sound research about the medical use of cannabis. Unfortunately, much of the group's 2017 report is about research gaps, including a lack of the basic science that would inform decisions about minimizing harm and maximizing the benefits of cannabis. The group likewise found the research lacking in the basic science that explains not just if, but how cannabis affects certain conditions. Even as more and more people use cannabis, there is insufficient conclusive evidence about its long-term health effects, the researchers wrote. In the list of barriers to research, the scientists pointed first to the federal classification of cannabis as a Schedule I substance. But the group of scientists also found some confirmation of cannabis's potential as a medicine. The report found conclusive or substantial evidence that cannabis did help certain conditions, including chronic pain, nausea caused by chemotherapy, and multiple sclerosis spasticity. Generally, the majority of spending by the U.S. government on cannabis research has been directed towards investigating the harms of recreational misuse, with little being spent on understanding its potential therapeutic value. From 2000 to 2018, the National Institutes of Health spent $1.4 billion on cannabis research, with over $1 billion of that going to study drug misuse, according to a 2020 study. Wow, that money could be used for so many better things. Welcome, Ben Arndt. Some have pointed out that since cannabis has already achieved widespread use without the underpinnings of adequate research, there might be little motivation in the industry to do the science now. Why would a company spend millions of dollars on research when it can make millions of dollars putting its cannabis product on shelves? A cannabis specialist and Harvard medical professor asked at a 2021 psychiatric conference. Only recently have some of those federal obstacles been removed. In 2021, the Drug Enforcement Administration announced that it would permit increased cultivation of research-grade cannabis, clearing the way for some additional studies of the plant's medicinal effects. Some predicted that this thaw in the opposition would kick off a decade-long surge in research on new and existing therapies. The fact that the research is lagging doesn't mean there is a lack of information about medical cannabis. Unfortunately, much of that information is not based on sound science. The chapters that follow sort out the good information from the bad and make it easy for you to understand it, without leaving out important details. First, it's best to know more about what cannabis is and how it works. Understanding those properties provides insights into why cannabis has been with humans for millennia, and also why it holds some promise as a medical therapy. You've been listening to World Reading Club, presented by Hakeem Ali Bokus Alexander on Spreaker, Social Podcasting and Wisdom, Social Audio Inc., presented for World Reading Club in association with UniquilibriuM. This edition's reading focus has come to us from the Mayo Clinic, Medical Marijuana, the Science and Benefits, relieving pain, easing anxiety, improving sleep, plus the many uses of CBD. Coming up next, CB2. Coming up next is Chapter 2, How Cannabis Works, Imposter Chemicals in the Brain. Stay tuned. I'm going to be here all night.